I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth. You think you're something? You can't do no syndication. I got men with machine guns on walls trying to get in here and get these documents. What are you talking about?
Man, I don't sweat you.
I
don't sweat you.
Are we clear? Crystal.
No. I'm introducing your host, Brett Snodgrass.
What's going on, everybody out there? Thank you for joining us again on another episode of the Simple Wholesaling Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Snodgrass. I'm with my co-host, Mr. Jaren Barnes, in the house.
Wiki.
What's up, man? You gonna rap it? Jaren didn't know where that movie came from, and if you guys are from the 90s, A Few Good Men, Tom Cruise, Jack Nicklaus.
I was born in the 90s.
Yeah.
I was in diapers.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite movies, man. Anyways, the reason why we did that for today's intro was we have a special guest on today's show named Amy
Wang.
Yeah,
Wan?
Amy Wan.
Amy Wan.
Amy Wan from Los Angeles, California, and she has come up with a software that is revolutionizing the legal industry called Bootstrap Legal, where she gives affordable legal advice. I would probably call her like the Airbnb
or the Uber of the legal industry.
Yeah.
At least in her very niche. But if she grows bigger, then I think that's her future.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool stuff, guys. If you guys are in real estate at all, you know that having access to an attorney for documents, for structuring some of these entrepreneurial things that we're doing, and Amy's talking about syndications, which are super complicated sometimes to me. She's going to go through all of that and how they are able to serve just a normal person, not the rich people, but her goal is to serve the just a normal everyday person.
The underdog.
Yeah, to do a syndication.
The Rocky Balboas out there in the world.
So cool intro, man. But how you doing?
Man, I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
A lot of changes in there.
Like your bald head?
Well, yeah, I started shaving my head with the razor because, I figured this, man. I'm gonna go bald anyway, so I might as well embrace it young, so that my body has time to adjust to a bald look. I don't know if it works that way, but that's how my mind works. So
that looks good, man.
Thanks,
I can see myself in it.
Yeah,
it's like a mirror.
I just shave it just like you shave your face. So.
Yeah, I don't shave my face very much.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to start shaving every day.
Yeah.
As a personal discipline. I used to shave like once every 2 weeks or so.
It just kind of gets, I don't know, you forget about it, and it just gets old, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I almost thought about getting like just laser surgery over all the places I don't want hair. That could lead. Yeah. I'm glad Gary's
that's a little over the line.
I'm glad. I was talking about like my face, my neck, my head. But if Gary Town, our transaction coordinator, was in the room right now, there would have been a line that was crossed. I'm just leaving it there. How about you, man? What's new in your world?
Things are good. Yeah, I just got back from San Diego. I took my wife Karen out. We went to a mastermind conference out there and the Collective Genius, and I got to speak, which was really cool out there, and I got some great feedback from it, and just learning a lot. Just learning what success means. Sometimes people think of success as just growing business, making more money, and I really learned that success can be defined in a lot of different areas of your life. And if you're super successful in business or in your finances, but you're not, you're failing miserably at being a husband or a dad, then you're not successful. And I would rather next year, make $100,000 in less money and spend 100 more hours with my family. And that is where I'm trying to define success. And so just think a lot about that, man. Think a lot about life. God's been really good to me, though.
Yeah, man.
So
it's awesome. He is good.
Yeah, definitely.
He is amazing. All right, Brett. So anyway, let's move on from there. Any iTunes review of the weeks, man?
Yeah, I think we do. Why don't you hit it off?
Man, this isn't scripted at all. All right, I got it. Check this out, guys. So, Love These Guys by Yura D. That's an awesome
You're a D. You're a D. I wonder what the D means.
I don't know.
Douchebag.
Hey,
no, I'm just kidding.
Family friendly. All right, these two shenanigans put out some of the best real estate podcasts I've heard. One of the struggles I had in the beginning were the quirky intros. I would always say, get to the guest. Now, after months of listening, it's my favorite part. Men,
yes,
continue spreading the gospel and being brutally honest in all you do. Aww.
Yeah, man. That's cool.
You're a D. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're a D. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, that was the best iTunes review I ever read. That was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. If you guys are just enjoying what we're doing, appreciate it, go on iTunes, leave us a review. We'll read it on the air, even if you're a D. So. That's good stuff, man.
All right, on to the inside of the week. I'm done.
So today's Inside the Week, I'm going to really just hit home with, again, talking about what Amy's going to talk about in her interview. And that's, if you're in a market and you don't have a good relationship with an attorney, or you don't have access to certain documents that you need to get access to, we're not attorneys here. At our meetups, we always say that, hey, whatever we say, this isn't legal advice. We're not attorneys. But it's good to have access to a good attorney. Here in Indianapolis, we have a company that's called Hocker & Associates, and Janet Hocker is one of the leading attorneys that I truly trust, and she's helped me out with so much, and that's an attorney that we really love to work with. We also work with another attorney called Janelle Berkshire, and she helps with a lot of our evictions and just things like that. It's just like, if you have a property and you have to evict somebody, instead of us going down to the courthouse that really doesn't know what we're doing, I don't really know what paperwork to file and all the legal hoops that you have to jump through, hiring an attorney is a great way to do that. And that's obviously what Amy's talking about. So in your market, if you don't go to Amy's, Bootstrap Legal, and she doesn't offer the service that you guys want, find a local attorney in your area, build that relationship. I would start off with, investors that have been doing this for a long time. What's their, have them introduce you to their attorney, and just, getting advice, getting, if you need, you're always going to need documents in the real estate game, whether it's a note, a mortgage, a purchase agreement, a lease, and have them read over your existing documents, because I'm sure there's language in there that maybe you should add or take out. It's very important to just have get your ship tighter. And I don't know, that's just my advice today.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think that's a really good way to find anything that you need. Like, something you highlighted, I think, was really was finding gold. If you go into a new market or you're just starting out, ask what everyone else is doing in whatever the area, and that'll probably get you at least 80% of the way there of where you need to be.
Yeah. At
least, if not 100%. So like if it's purchase agreements, hey, who do you get your purchase agreements from? Or, who's your direct mail guy? Or what direct mail strategy are you doing? And if you ask enough people those same questions, you'll get like a few, the 2 or 3 options that everybody's pretty much doing. So like, for example, with title companies, the 3 main title companies that are investor friendly in Indianapolis are Meridian Title, Hocker & Associates, and Paramount Title. Right?
Yeah. And then there's another title company that just came out. They're pretty new. They're called Investor Title Services.
So those are the 4, and how we know that is because everyone uses them, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're starting out, that's a really easy way for you to find anything that you need to figure out in your market.
Yeah, definitely. And how I got introduced to Hocker & Associates was from a friend from California who she was doing a lot of owner financing, a lot of land contracts. I don't really talk to her much anymore, but we used to talk like once every month or so just to kind of how things are going. She used to invest a lot in Indianapolis. And I said, I needed an attorney. And I said, who's the best attorney that you know? Because I knew that she would know. And she introduced me to Janet Hocker over at Hocker & Associates. And that's how I got to know them. So I actually found them by asking for a referral.
Yep. That's awesome.
So,
spiritual foundations. I know that was attractive.
So today on Spiritual Foundations, guys, I'm going to take the reins on this a little bit, and just something happened this past week, which I thought was really cool. I think it was a God thing, and he used my family to really just kind of tell me something. So I just got back from this mastermind group, Collected Genius, and my daughter, Kaylin, she had gotten me a Christmas present. She went out with my parents, and she had gotten a couple of presents, and she was super excited to give me this Christmas present. And typically, my daughter's 10 years old, and typically in her elementary days, she would go to her school Christmas function where they have a shop set up and they buy different things. And it's usually like, it's pretty cool, and because I'm a dad, but it'll be like a little trophy that says #1 dad, or it'll be a coin tray, or it'll be just some little knick-knacky game. And that's cool. That's just what I usually expect. But this time she wrapped up my present, and she gave it to me last night, or a couple nights ago, and it was a book. And a book, I always feel like, is such an acquired taste. It's like, I don't know, what's my 10-year-old daughter going to get me in a book? Is it going to be about puppies? Is it going to be like about gymnastics? Or what's it really going to be about? So I opened this book, and the first word is driven, which is a word that we use a lot as entrepreneurs. Are you driven? And, at the Collected Genius Mastermind group, they always talk about being so driven. We're so type A. We wake up and we have that internal drive in us. And that's just who I am. So I'm a very driven person. Whatever I do, I want to do it 150%. So that's the first word, driven. And then the rest of the title was Driven by Eternity. And that was just a book, and it kind of threw me for a loop. And I was like, wow. Like, those are some very powerful words. And I open up the book and I read this first chapter, and it really just kind of has been hitting me lately. As an entrepreneur, what are you guys driven by?
Wow, that's a really good word.
Yeah. So like, what are you driven by? Are you driven by this life? Are you driven? We talk all the time about the most money that you can make, and then it's going to be gone, and you're going to die, and you're going to die and go to eternity. And first it talks about just defining eternity, and what does that even mean? And eternity kind of is just a word that our human brains can't even really comprehend, because everything in this life is finite. Everything comes to an end. So to think about an eternity as something that is everlasting, when we say the everlasting God, like, we can't really even fathom what that even is, because we don't have that here. So it's like, first it defines eternity and what that is, and then it says, on this earth, God talks in Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So we can't even comprehend what this is. And this book really is all about just, what are you driven by? And I've just been thinking, am I driven by the finite things of this world, the things that are going to end? Or am I really driven by eternity? Because God talks about, our rewards are in eternity. He's going to give us rewards in eternity. So it's just really been hitting me. I have not found the answer yet. But I really just, going into this next year, I just want to be driven by eternal things, and not, I think they called them temporal things. Yeah. Just things that are temporary. And that's just the word that I've been kind of feeling today. And just that drive.
That's a really heavy question.
I'm like, it's like, and I get this from my 10-year-old daughter, and I'm like, man, like, God, you must really be speaking to me, because this is a heavy book from a 10-year-old. And I don't think she even knows. She's like, are you going to read it? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, really? And she really was concerned that I was, that I might not read it. And she really wanted me to give me a good gift. And I'm like, man, this is like amazing. And so it's cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm going to go do some reflecting and be like, what is driving me?
There you go.
I don't know. Because I've definitely, I'm naturally not a driven person. Mm-hmm. I think I learned how to become driven this year. And I definitely am just starting to walk and stumbling a lot, crawling on my knees a lot, in what it means to be a driven person. But I definitely have developed some drive, but what's the source from, Is it, that's a really good question. So I'm going to go do some soul searching.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord.
If you guys are listening, I recommend, again, this book's called Driven by Eternity. And obviously the number one book you should be reading is the Holy Bible. But this really gives you a lot of just scripture and verses that you can go to the Bible and get that from. And what does eternity mean? And how can you live for eternity now? And so go there.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we are so excited for today's guest. We are interviewing Amy Wan from Los Angeles, California. And Amy is the founder of an amazing company called Bootstrap Legal. And Amy believes that small business entrepreneurs are the drivers of innovation and job creation. Yet, I know for me personally that finding good attorneys or just legal documents or legal counsel in general is so difficult for us. We have to jump through all these different hoops. Well, that is why Amy created Bootstrap Legal. And they're building tools and a software that brings legal help to entrepreneurs in a non-intimidating way and at a very affordable price. Did I sell that good?
Man.
That sounds awesome.
You must be like 90 episodes into a podcast or something. Bro.
Yeah,
you
man.
Sound like a professional.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us, Amy. How are you doing out on the West Coast?
I'm good. It's sunny out here, so I'm very lucky.
I know. I just got back from San Diego, and I couldn't believe the weather. We're sitting here in 20 degrees here in Indiana, and I could actually, go outside. I could wear a short sleeve shirt or a suit, and I'd still feel amazing. So
Yeah,
that's the one thing that, I would actually argue, though, that outside of the winter months, Indiana is more beautiful than California.
Really?
I would, yeah. I think especially like fall, spring, summer, because Indiana, because no one actually cares about this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, it's the furthest west eastern time zone state. So you have the longest days in the summer. You like in Indiana, you actually will, the sun goes down around 9:30 in Indiana.
Yeah.
And it's really, really cool. I mean, it's beautiful here outside of the winter. So my suggestion, have like a vacation home in Florida that you go to in the winter's months and then come back to Indiana.
That sounds awesome, Jaren. I should be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, you should. So to kick this thing off, Amy, let's dive into your background story a bit. How did you get into law? How did you kind of come up with this process and this idea of Bootstrap Legal?
Yeah, sure. It's really funny. I actually went to law school to be a human rights attorney, right? Because I actually genuinely wanted to help people. I remember my first summer of law school, I was working at a human rights commission in a country where basically that spring summer, they turned from a democracy to a dictatorship. And that's kind of how I learned that human rights does not cross borders, but money does. So, I talked to one of my mentors. They said, hey, follow the money. There are ways to tie money and morality together. So I kind of pivoted, switched to international trade. After graduation, I worked for the federal government for a while doing basically like international trade law, policy. So we were the folks who would like go to the go to the WTO and, help negotiate free trade agreements. And while I was in DC, I met my husband. He ended up needing to move to California for his job, and that's where I'm originally from. So I was happy to move back, but obviously in California, there's no free trade agreements that need negotiating. So pretty much had to start all over. Ended up becoming general counsel of a very early stage startup that did real estate crowdfunding at the time, which was a very new topic at the time. And after that, that's how I got my background in, real estate and securities. That company, I joined it because I thought it was really interesting. This was 2013, right? And, the housing, the real estate market was still not what it was after the recession. The founders, were from Chicago, and there were just so many abandoned, dilapidated houses in Chicago that, people could flip, except they didn't have access to capital to do it. And so I thought, wow, this is really intriguing. You can use money to help, put a house back in really good condition so that a good American family can live in it, right? So that's why I joined that company. And over the years, I left that startup, ended up being a partner at a law firm that focused in real estate syndication. And basically last year, I got to a point in my practice where I thought, the first thing was, if I have to keep writing these same documents over and over the next 30 years, I don't think I'm going to be very happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are parts of legal where there's a lot of creativity, a lot of intellectual stimulation. For me, that's like actually structuring or crafting the deal or advising the client. But then there are other things that are just really rote, really boring, and to me, not a good use of my time and not a good use of the client's money to pay me to do that stuff. And that's like, sitting there and making sure that, for this deal, property is pluralized properties across, more than 100 pages of documents. You can't just do like a control find, replace all for that kind of stuff. It doesn't quite work that way. And then the second thing was like, I had a client that I met at a real estate event. He was just starting out at the time. And one day he called me up and he was like, hey, I want to do a $300,000 syndication. And I was like, okay, well, I will tell you how much we would have to charge as a firm. And then I know you're not going to hire us to do it because the transactional cost doesn't make sense. I told him the price. Obviously, he did not end up doing a syndication. And the entire ordeal made me realize that, for a lot of people who are doing smaller deals, like the cost, you want to use an attorney just to dot your I's and cross your T's, but it doesn't make sense, right? Like the deal is too small. And so I thought, man, if there is a better, cheaper, faster way of doing this, then the client saves money, you save time. I don't, drive myself crazy for the next 30 years. And I think everyone will be a lot happier. So that's really why I started this company.
Man,
yeah.
Well, I just gotta say, you are not ambitious at all. I really think you need to get motivated and accomplish a few things in life.
Yeah.
It's just not cutting it.
Let's go, Amy. Come on. Get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, kidding. It's amazing. Like that's quite the track record, and I think you've really stumbled upon a really unique service, especially for real estate investors. Because I know, especially for our audience, most people who do real estate wholesaling, they're not licensed, so they don't have access to good contracts. They don't have access to this standard industries, and to have a fair price solution to that, it literally is a game changer. So yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this interview, man.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. So Bootstrap Legal, and I come from, I was talking to a gentleman when I first got started in real estate, and he told me that if you're going to do any type of real estate investing, eventually you're going to be in, a legal situation or in the courtroom or something like that. It's just going to happen. And I actually spent the first 6 or 7 years, and I never really had to, do that besides just, going to title companies and things like that. And then the crap just hit the fan. All of a sudden I was in like a bunch of legal situations all at one time. And I have been doing this thing for like 6 or 7 years. And I said, I don't know anything about any of this stuff. So again, I'm super excited to dive in. And so talk about this service that you guys have.
Yeah.
Who would be interested in going and using your service when you're talking about wholesalers, buy and hold investors, and even talking about syndications, which is something that, again, I don't have any idea how to do, which brings us to this. So who would be interested in going to your platform or your site?
Yeah. So what the software I built specifically does is it automates the first draft of real estate syndication documents, private equity funds, crowdfunding, basically anything that involves the raising of capital, right? Now, I think traditionally as an attorney, the people who would use the service or retain an attorney or a traditional law firm to do this for them were going to be, people who were syndicating or raising capital for, larger commercial real estate sorts of things, right? Like, oh, I want to bring down this 300-unit multifamily apartment or this, mixed use, thing, and they'd be raising, at least a couple $1 million. Now, it's really interesting. Ever since I launched this software, I've actually been getting calls from the Resi folks too. So in terms of what that looks like, because I think the cost and the turnaround time has gone down, I still necessarily think it makes sense to say go syndicate or go crowdfund necessarily just like one house, especially if it's like a house in the Midwest as opposed to like, New York or Beverly Hills where every house is like $1 million, right? Mm-hmm. But what I do think makes sense is, being able to go and say, okay, I'm going to raise a fund for, I don't know, $500,000, $1 million. And this fund I'm going to deploy to use to flip houses, right? I can go to a trustee sale. I can go to an auction. I can go to whatever. And I have the money ready to acquire those houses. If you're a wholesaler, right, to the extent that you're wholesaling, what do you call it? Or to the extent that you go and you handle a lot of houses at any one time, and you don't necessarily have people that you can work with. If the bank is not going to give you a loan or something like that, go and start your own fund, and it's basically your own personal line of credit to go and do your business. So basically, our software doesn't do everything under the sun. It's highly specialized. It's pretty much only for people who are raising money. But the one thing I found in life is, or at least in the real estate world, is everyone is always needing money.
Yeah.
100%.
I need more money. Yeah. Today, when we're a lot more successful than we were like 6 years ago. It's like, yeah.
So dive into what the process would look like to set up a fund like that. I mean, so let's say I'm a Brett Snodgrass, so I'm not just some Joe Smo off the street, but I'm really good looking and have blue eyes and all that. And,
all right, I'll give you 100,000. Okay.
No.
Sorry.
So somebody has like 10 years experience or a lot more experience in wholesaling than just some guy that just got started finishing up a course or whatever. How does what are the requirements to justify putting a fund together? Like, obviously you need to have some people to give you money, but beyond that, like, what's the next step? Let's say he has like 5 people that routinely kind of give him money case by case, but he wanted to pull a fund together. What would that look like?
And the sure. legalities behind it too, because I'm kind of really in that spot that I have a lot of private people that want to give money, that's just want to give the company money, but I don't really know how to legally set that up, and I think that's where you come in. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is to actually sit down and come up with a plan, right? And so there's a couple questions that you need to be asking yourself. First of all, the first thing is, how much money do you want to raise, right? Is your fund going to be $500,000, $1 million? Are you going to aim for $3 million? So you kind of have to have like a goal in mind. The second thing is you should know who you want to raise money from. And when I say who, it kind of means like, you don't have to already have specific people in mind, but you kind of have to have a general idea of, what is their level of sophistication? And are these going to be people you already know, or are they going to be strangers, right? So, and this is where we dive into securities laws a little bit. Now, securities laws, generally there's, a couple different categories of people. There's non-accredited investors and accredited investors. So accredited investors are basically rich people. Like technically the definition is, their net worth is $1 million or more, excluding their residence, or their, annual income is $200,000 or more for the past 2 calendar years, right? So basically a rich person, and then there's all the non-rich people. And then in terms of who you're raising money from, are you going to people you already know, like people that are in your network, or are you going to be doing what we call general solicitation, right? So that basically means advertising. It means you are going out and reaching out to people that maybe you've never met, right? So say I was raising a fund and I went on your podcast and I was like, hey, everybody, I'm raising, a $2 million fund to, wholesale houses or flip houses over the next 3 years. Come invest with me. If I did that on your podcast show, that would be general solicitation, right? I'm going out to strangers that I've never met before. So those are 2 key questions because that basically determines your legal strategy. There are different laws around which you can raise money. And if you decide who you're raising money from up front, it's much easier to strategize around which law you're going to use because you can't just do everything under the sun when it comes to raising capital. That's why we have securities law.
Yeah. Well, let's just take one of those routes. So I know people that I already know. I mean, I've been doing this thing for 10 years. I know a lot of real estate investors and investors in general. So I want to raise capital, not general solicitation, just people that I know. So what do I do? And how do I get around the law?
Somebody's taking notes over here,
I
calling them out,
I'm taking them right now
on the shoulder.
This is totally not legal advice. We're totally talking hypotheticals.
Oh, okay.
But for someone like that,
this is legal advice. You can invoice me after.
No, that's a joke. That is a joke. Don't ever say that to an attorney, bro.
Oh man. But yeah, so like for someone like that who's pretty experienced, they already had their own network, they're actually going to rely on the probably the oldest regulatory exemption, the one that's been around for decades, and that's what we call Rule 506B of Regulation D. I know that's just a lot of fancy terminology for that. Just means that you can't advertise, but you can go out to people in your pre-existing network, right? And the people that you can raise money from is basically as many accredited investors as you want and up to 35 non-accredited investors. And that's pretty much it. For the non-accredited investors, you just want to make sure that they're sophisticated, that they understand what they're investing in, that they know they could lose all their money, and they're not. It's not like grandma and her last Social Security paycheck. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to recap, so you said 35 non-accredited investors and as many accredited investors as you want, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And you can raise as much as you want.
So then going down that route, to invest with an accredited investor, do you need any sort of documentations or licensings or anything like that?
Sure. So you don't necessarily need any licensing, especially if you are raising all of this yourself. In terms of documentation, yes, you do need that. So, I think generally in the world, there are things that you'll want to use an attorney for, and then there's things where it's not that necessary, right? When it comes to raising capital, this falls under securities law. So I don't think people should want to mess with the SEC. I think they should, want to keep pretty compliant, especially since, the consequences of not doing things compliantly can be very severe. But generally what people need is a couple documents. They need, whatever documents they need for their entity, whether it's a corporation or an LLC. So it might be bylaws or operating agreement. They need a PPM. Now, a PPM is a private placement memorandum. It's basically like a 40 to 100-page document that basically lays out every single risk that an investor should know about with regard to the investment. And the last thing is just a subscription agreement. It's just like the the document that an investor signs to say like, yes, I am investing in this deal.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Well, that gives us a good start. So the question that everybody is going to ask if they're going to invest with me or any other company is, I'm going to take 100,000 of my hard-earned dollars. I'm going to put it with you. How do I know that it's safe? Is it just, I'm betting on you and you're the jockey and I'm putting my money down on you and you better, if you fail, my money's gone? Or is there any collateral? Is there any security that they know that, there's obviously risk involved, but is there anything besides just saying, I'm good and I'll make it work and they're just betting on me?
So there are two answers to that question. The first thing is whenever an investor, especially a real estate investor, is investing in a deal like this, they're really looking at two things, right? They're looking at the sponsor and they're looking at the actual property. So, and those are really the two things that they're underwriting, right? Now, for the larger commercial deals, remember where I said, the transactional cost makes a bit more sense. It's because they're buying one huge apartment building. It's probably like $20 million. So they're raising $4 million or something like that. So you can both underwrite the sponsor and the actual property because they've identified it. But for something like what we're talking about right now, like something for the residential folks, it doesn't necessarily make sense to go and syndicate things property by property. And so if you're doing a fund, that's pretty much what we call a blind pool. There is no property or properties to underwrite. So the trust factor is really you, right? And that's basically why when people approach me for wanting to put together a small fund for like something in the residential space, there's basically two strategies. It's either the beginner who is going to start a really tiny fund and it's pretty much limited to their friends and family, people who there's already trust with, or if it's someone a lot more experienced, they can go and start a larger fund, but they've got a track record that everyone generally knows about. And so there's that history of trust, right? Now, in terms of is there security? Now, that depends. It totally depends on, it totally depends on how you are structuring the deal, right? I mean, I've seen things where there isn't security. Typically in real estate, there is, and there's a lot of different ways to get at security, right? You can indirectly secure something, or the property can directly be owned by the fund. It also depends on what kind of fund you're putting together. Is it going to be an equity fund? Will it be a debt fund where, you're just paying people a simple interest rate, right? And typically, I mean, there's so many different variations just because everyone has a different goal and a different need. So, that really comes down to sitting down for a couple minutes and figuring out like, okay, what distributions do I want to pay people? And do I want to give them security? If you give them security, obviously the returns are going to be a little bit less because the risk is less. If you don't give them security, it's going to be a lot more.
Interesting.
So a follow-up question on that, how do you pay out from the fund? Like, how would you structure? Would you essentially establish like quarterly dividends, or like how do you pay out returns?
Yeah, so it really depends. Again, right? It kind of depends on what are the needs of the sponsor and what will investors accept. Now, I'll tell you that normally, from what I see, I mean, you could pay monthly, you could pay quarterly, you could pay annually. I usually recommend quarterly because, annually it's kind of too long. People forget about you. And then monthly, if you have to, sit there and do your books monthly, it might drive you crazy.
Yeah.
In terms of how you structure your distributions, right? Generally, we have this concept called a waterfall of preferred return. And it basically means that, okay, so any money that we make that's actually a profit, right? We are going to give back to investors, but investors get paid back first to some certain extent. And afterwards, then the investor and the sponsor will have some sort of split. So I would say in the commercial world for an equity fund, normally it's something like, an 8 to 9% preferred return. That means investors are getting an 8 to 9% return first, right? And once you reach that 8 to 9%, then there's some sort of split. So it might be like a 70-30 split, 70 to investors, 30 to the sponsor. Now, on the resi side, depends on whether it's an equity or debt fund. And of course, everything is kind of a sliding scale. Like, I've done deals where someone promised like a 16% preferred return, which is super high, right? Although it was new construction. But at the same time, the actual split, once investors reach that 16%, was just 50-50 instead of 70-30. I've seen other things where there was no preferred return. It was just a straight split. And then I've seen other things, and this is more common in, debt funds, or where people are really looking more to pay something that looks more like interest than, potential return on the whole thing, but, not having a split and just having a straight preferred return. So once investors get X% preferred return, the sponsor gets everything afterwards. So it really depends on what type of fund you're putting together. And it depends on, who the sponsor is and what their investment audience is willing to accept.
So, I'm typically, working with private investors, obviously, and the real estate is collateral, or I just give them a fixed rate return. Is that typical in a syndication of saying, hey, we're putting a fund together for $1 million and you're going to get 8.5% interest every quarter? And is that typical, or is it always kind of based on 8% plus, a split of the revenue or something?
I would say in the residential world, that's a lot more typical. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So the typical, so on average across the board, a good return, if you're putting something together, a good return is what? 8, 9%, 10%. That's pretty average on what people should give or expect.
That's an interesting question.
Okay.
It's a really hard question to answer because every region kind of has like its own, standard of, oh, this is a good deal. And then of course it depends on what you're doing, right? Are you doing equity, debt? Are you doing residential, commercial? I would say in the residential world, if you're giving back like a straight preferred return, somewhere between like 8 to 10%, that's pretty standard I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. I guess it's all in the perspective because, in the investor world, if I'm paying 10% interest, sometimes I'm like, well, that's really good deal. But if I tell my neighbor and they're used to the standard, traditional bank loan terms at 5% or whatever that is, you're like, man, you're just, that's a ripoff.
Yeah, because that's why I laughed a minute ago when you were like 8.5%. I was like, what? Because in the hard money rates, like everybody's looking at like 12%, 15% plus 2 points.
Yeah.
So. Interesting.
But it's funny, like hard money varies in geography too. Like if you go to, like if you're lending or raising hard money in California, the rates are so much lower than the rest of the country because there's so much more capital in California and it's very competitive and everyone's trying to deploy capital versus the rest of the country,
Yeah.
So the
because
goal,
your real estate has gone up by like 400%.
Yeah.
Everybody has their equity lines out.
So the goal is what you should do is you should invest in Indiana and get your hard money lender from California.
There you go.
Boom.
That's good.
Boom.
Awesome. Well, hey, this is great stuff. So, just to kind of go back to Bootstrap Legal. So is this really the only thing that you guys do is syndication, documentation, and setting these things up?
For now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's good stuff, though.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Because it's you make it sound really simple, but I always thought it was a pretty complicated process.
Well, that's what they do.
I know.
They make it simple.
Yeah. So
they should change their name
and
to
an affordable price.
They should change their name to, instead of like, because we're like simple wholesaling, simple bootstrap syndications.
That's right. Cool. We just probably got time for one more question before we go into the next section of the show. So my question is, your tagline is "Welcome to a new kind of legal." And what does that exactly mean? How are you able to be that new kind of legal when
it's catchy, by the way?
Yeah, good job. Yeah, attorney's been around forever. So what does this mean? New kind of legal.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I don't think anything in the legal industry has changed in like a couple 100 years, except for the fact that now we have Microsoft Word and email, right? But everyone's still doing everything the same way. And I think what I have repeatedly heard from clients, and remember, I used to be a client myself because I was general counsel. I had to hire other attorneys, right? The process is so expensive. It's so intimidating. I would say there are a demographic of attorneys that you might describe as like curmudgeonly and kind of grumpy, And so I wanted to really make the legal process a lot more friendly, a lot more affordable, a lot more for the everyday Joe or Jane, right? And not for like rich people, because that's pretty much who can afford legal services, like large corporations and rich people. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, this is the law. It applies to everyone. How come only rich people can be compliant with the law? So we're really trying to get at something that's less intimidating, a lot more friendly, a lot more user-friendly, right? Like, I think everyone hates the billable hour. Attorneys hate it. Clients hate it. Why do we have it? I don't know.
It's so gray.
So,
like, I have no idea how much I'm gonna get charged. Yeah. It's so gray.
Yeah, and that's happened.
We'll start off with 1,000, right? And go from there.
Yeah, I've literally sent emails to attorneys, like outside counsel, before. I'll have a simple question, and they come back. They write like a 4-paragraph answer, and then next month I get like a $2,500 bill for it. I'm like, I just wanted probably yes or probably no. I don't want you to invent work for yourself, And so right. I just want like a more practical approach to law.
Well, I just want to highlight your heart, Amy. I really appreciate just, even in your story where you started off the type of law that you were pursuing in human rights, and just your heart to fight for the underdog and to make a difference in the world. That's very much our heart here at Simple Wholesaling. And so I just commend you for that, and keep that going, because I know it's easy in this dark, cruel, evil, disgusting world sometimes.
Yeah.
To sorry for being so harsh, but definitely this last year I've definitely had a big dose of realism of how ugly the world can be. And it's especially you. I mean, you see it every day as a lawyer,
Yeah.
It's kind of like an acquisition manager.
We're the janitors of society. That's what lawyers are.
Is that why you guys are always the butt of everybody's jokes?
I guess so.
That's funny.
Well, hey, real quick, I need to mention the show notes before Brett fires me, because I always forget to mention them. So, guys, there's going to be a lot of links and mentions and so forth at www.simplewholesaling.com/episode 90. And my final question before we go into the next section: what is the price for your guys' services? I think that's a good segue from where we were at. She's like, free.
Yeah. So basically, it depends on how much you're raising, but for any fund that's less than $3 million, we basically charge an all-inclusive flat fee of $7,500.
Wow, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, that's all the questions before we go in the next section of the show. Are you ready?
I was born ready.
All right, let's do it.
1, 2, 3.
Going deep. So, in this section of the show, Amy, we're just going to ask a little bit more of, about your life and your why. Thank you so much for opening your heart and sharing your story. But you give a lot of advice on legal advice and money matters, and you've been on countless podcasts. I know you've seen your name out there quite a bit, and you're building your own business, and you're someone that has given that much advice. And you always go back and can you share a little bit about just your purpose again in all this? I know you probably shared a little bit already, but share your purpose. Why are you, giving out very affordable legal advice? Most legals, I've sat literally in a room with, 5 attorneys and they like to, I remember one attorney was bragging about how he won this case so he could, put in his swimming pool. It was always about how much money that they could make. But you kind of come from a different place. So what's your purpose in all this and really trying to shake up the legal industry?
Yeah, I think, I know there's definitely a lot of attorneys who self-select into the legal profession because it's supposed to make really good money. That's not quite my motivation for going into the law. At the end of the day, the way I see it is that justice and fairness are the two things that you're supposed to be able to achieve with a good legal system. I don't think that we have a good legal system today. I think today, the people who have a ton of money can out-litigate the people who don't have money. They hire these armies of attorneys, whereas most people can't even afford one attorney, right? Like, I feel like justice right now is very much for those who can actually afford it. And to me, that doesn't make sense because at the end of the day, if you go back to where all these laws come from, where they're made, they're supposed to be made by your elected representatives and they're supposed to apply to everyone. I remember when I was a young attorney, the moment I found out that, as a regular citizen, you might not even have access to know what the law is. Like, that blows my mind, And so, I don't think it's, I don't see myself here as doing charitable work. I just see myself as, I guess kind of reviving the legal profession and, reframing it to what I think it should be in the first place, right? And it should be accessible to all. It should be affordable to all. It's very difficult to do that. It is difficult to provide the same level or quality of service. But I think with today's technology, it's also very possible. It's just that a lot of people, a lot of attorneys maybe aren't the most technologically forward people in the world. And then at the same time, you don't see a lot of investment into this type of technology. Now, I would say maybe over the past year that's changing, but still, it's we're still, I think, today pretty far away.
Yeah. I think it's cool. It's a good answer. Thank you so much. Technology is changing so much.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I mean, it's real crazy, especially if you I was just listening to a podcast, an interview with Tim Ferriss on the Rich Roll podcast today, and they were talking about there's the future of AI, artificial intelligence is some pretty scary, interesting stuff. The context of the conversation was that just as a chimpanzee right now, no matter what you do, you can never get them to the point where they understand the concept of a plane in the sky because they just don't have enough brain matter. There's a lot of assumption that AI will get to the point where it will understand things conceptually that we don't have the capacity to understand. And that's really scary. Anyway, sorry for nerding out real quick, but talking about technology, and since you are such an avid, technological player in this space, how do you see the future of the law industry changing by technology? Do you understand my question?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to change a lot, right? I think it's going to really democratize access to legal services and legal help for, a lot of the population. I think that the attorney's role is going to change a lot more, right? I think attorneys should be doing things where they add significant value, and not necessarily the places where, a paralegal or first-year associate the same type of work. Like that type of work isn't that valuable to the client. So whether it's like automating the drafting of documents or, automating a lot of research or whatever, like I see the future job of an attorney really being the person who brings a lot of experience and saying, hey, by the way, you should consider this, or hey, here's some advice for your particular situation, as opposed to like, oh, let me just like help you on this transaction.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
More of a trusted advisor. I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that's what every industry is going towards,
Yeah. I think every industry, it's crazy how technology has changed every industry. And I think that every industry right now should be kind of thinking about, I need to change.
Yeah.
It's just else. Everywhere. It's like, grocery stores, people don't go to the grocery store, they get it delivered right now. Uber shook up the taxi industry. I just got back from this mastermind conference, and they're talking about, tech companies out in California or whatever are really, really, really trying to shake up real estate agents. Are real estate agents needed anymore? I don't know. Maybe in 5 years they will not be. So it's like really, it's crazy how people are really trying to move this needle on tech, just changing every industry. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a great legal time to be alive.
That's right. Before we go into the last section, Amy, do you want to say anything else to our audience about your service, about, what you guys do? Why should they go to your site, anything like that?
Only that, we do offer free consultations. So if anyone's interested, they can just go to bootstraplegal.com. They click on Learn More under Real Estate, and there's a button where they can schedule consultations.
Man, it's awesome.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Love your heart. I love your heart, Amy.
Definitely. Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to end on a fun note, a quick random note. So this is called the touch of randomness. We're going to ask you a couple of questions. Just kind of feel free to answer the first thing that comes to your mind. Amy, are you ready?
I like this first question.
All right. So Amy, you were named in the top 10 women to watch in legal tech. So if you were to be named in the top 10 in any other random category, what would that be?
Oh, I would one day want to be, top 10 women who have raised, capital or VC money, in the tech startup space.
All right. Sounds good. We're going to actually create that category for you and name you.
Yep.
Number one.
So let me see here. The Winter Olympics are coming up in February, and you had the physical, and if you had, if you had the physical gifts to compete in any event, what would that event be and why?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Figure skating, man. That's I'm sorry, that's like the one thing I watch at every Winter Olympics.
That is pretty cool. It's fascinating.
Brett, what about you? I'm curious on that question. What would you want to compete in?
I don't know. Maybe bobsled.
Bobsled,
yeah.
I'd want to only do it for like Team Jamaica.
Teams.
That's the only people I'd want to do it with.
Awesome. Well, hey, it sounds good. Thank you so much, Amy, for being on the show today. I know that I gotten so much out of it, and I know I've taken down some notes here, and I'm getting ready to probably contact your company and try to do a syndication myself.
Let's do it.
Yeah. But again, tell our audience, where is the best place for them to go to get in contact with you?
Yeah, sure. It's just bootstraplegal.com, and they can find Bootstrap Legal on all the different social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff.
Cool. That's it, guys. Go to bootstraplegal.com right now if you're interested in raising capital and building a syndication. This is the place to go. And that is a wrap with Amy Wan on today's show. Thank you so much, Amy, for being on the show, and we wish you so much success.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem.